It was a cold, rainy afternoon when Max, a German shepherd, found himself alone outside a small, crowded animal shelter. The rain poured down, and the world seemed to ignore him. He was tied to a post in the back of the shelter, waiting and wondering what had gone wrong. His once shiny fur was wet and matted, and his eyes, full of confusion and pain, stared into the dark sky. Max didn't understand why he was there. Only a few days ago, Max had lived in a house with a family. He had a home, a warm bed, and people who once smiled and played with him. He had been loved, or so he thought. The memory of his old home was still fresh in his mind. He remembered the sound of children laughing as they ran around the yard, his owner, a man named Tom, calling for him to fetch a ball, and his mother, Sarah, giving him treats. Max had been happy there. He had been the good dog, always ready to protect and play. But slowly things began to change. Tom and Sarah started spending more time at work. The children, once full of energy and play, grew older and busier. Max, always full of energy, didn't know how to handle the quiet. He needed someone to play with, someone to run with, but no one had the time. They had their own lives now, and Max's energy became too much. At first, they tried to keep up with him, but Max's need for attention and excitement was constant. He barked when no one played with him. He dug in the yard when he got bored. He chewed up shoes and furniture when he felt lonely. His actions were cries for help, but Tom and Sarah didn't see it that way. They thought Max was just being too much. They couldn't handle his energy anymore. And so, one sad day, they made a decision that would break Max's heart. Max was dropped off at the shelter with no explanation, no goodbye, and no love. Tom and Sarah told the shelter worker that Max was too energetic, that they couldn't deal with him anymore. They didn't think about how Max had loved them, how he had protected their home and made them smile. They just saw a dog that was too much to handle. Now, sitting in the rain, Max didn't understand. Why had they left him? What had he done wrong? He had been loyal, always wagging his tail when they came home. He had never meant to be a problem. He just wanted to be part of their family. The shelter was filled with other dogs, each one with a story of abandonment, but none of them seemed to have the same confusion that Max did. Some dogs had accepted their fate, lying quietly in their cages. Others barked and jumped at the bars, desperate to get attention. Max, however, was quiet, sitting by the post with his head down, waiting for something to change. Days passed, and Max's hope began to fade. He had been at the shelter for a week now, and no one seemed to notice him. He was a large, strong dog, and many people thought he would be too much to handle. He saw people come and go, but no one stopped to meet his eyes. No one asked about him. Max was used to being loved and needed, but now he felt forgotten. The shelter workers would come by to feed him, but that was all. No one took him for walks. No one played with him, and no one seemed to care. It was as if he had become just another dog, lost in a world that didn't have room for him. But Max wasn't ready to give up. Even though he was scared, he knew he had something special to offer. He had love to give, and he just needed someone who would see past his mistakes, past his loud barks and energy, and understand what he really needed, a family to love him, just as he had loved them. Little did Max know, there was someone out there, someone who would see the good in him, someone who would change his life forever. Sarah had always loved dogs, but after losing her own dog, a quiet sadness settled in her heart. It had been 12 years since she first adopted Daisy, a playful golden retriever who had been her constant companion. Daisy was with her through all the highs and lows of life, through moves, new jobs, and even the quiet days when Sarah just needed someone to talk to. But after Daisy passed away, Sarah didn't know if she was ready to adopt again. The thought of losing another dog was too painful. Still, there was something missing in her life. Sarah spent her days working at a small bakery, and though she loved her job, she couldn't shake the feeling that her heart was empty. She would pass by the animal shelter on her way home, and each time she thought about stopping in to look at the dogs. But fear held her back. Fear of getting too attached, fear of having to say goodbye again. One afternoon, Sarah decided to take a walk and clear her mind. As she walked near the shelter, she noticed a sign on the door that read, "Adopt a friend today." Without really thinking, she turned and walked inside. The warmth and sounds of barking greeted her, and she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Inside, the shelter was a busy place. Dogs were barking, wagging their tails, and some were sitting quietly, waiting for their forever homes. Sarah smiled as she walked down the aisles of kennels. She stopped to look at a few dogs. Some were calm and relaxed, while others jumped excitedly at the bars, begging for attention. But as she walked further down, she noticed a large dog sitting quietly in the back corner of his kennel. Max was not barking or jumping. He was just sitting there, his head lowered, eyes staring out into space. His fur was matted from the rain, and his once shiny coat looked dull and wet. But there was something about him that caught Sarah's attention. His eyes were deep and thoughtful, and even though he looked sad, there was an unmistakable intelligence in them. Sarah approached the kennel and stood quietly for a moment, watching him. Max lifted his head slowly and met her gaze. In that moment, Sarah felt a connection, something deep inside her that made her want to help him. She had always believed that every dog deserved a second chance, but Max needed more than just a second chance. He needed someone who could see his potential, someone who could give him the love and care he truly deserved. Sarah looked at the shelter worker, who had walked up to her. "This one's been here for a while," the worker said. "His name's Max. He's a German Shepherd, and he's a great dog, but he's got a lot of energy. He was abandoned because his owners couldn't handle him. He's not a bad dog, just too much for them." Sarah's heart broke as she listened. She could see that Max wasn't a bad dog at all. He was just misunderstood. She could tell that he was full of life, full of love to give, but that he needed someone to help him channel it in the right way. She thought for a moment. Was she ready to take on a dog like Max? She had never owned a German Shepherd before, and she knew they could be high energy and hard to manage. But something about Max's calm yet alert nature told her that he wasn't just a handful. He was a dog who needed guidance, love, and patience. "I'll take him," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. The shelter worker smiled. "I think he's going to be a great fit for you." The paperwork was completed quickly, and within an hour, Sarah was driving Max to his new home. Max sat quietly in the back seat, his head resting against the window as they drove through the city. Sarah looked in the rearview mirror and saw his eyes watching her. She smiled softly. She knew they were both on a journey, and even though it was just the beginning, she had a feeling they were going to change each other's lives. Max had been abandoned for being too much, but to Sarah, he was exactly what she needed. She saw the good in him, the potential, the loyalty, and the heart full of love waiting to shine through. Little did she know, this decision would not only change Max's life, but would also heal a part of her heart that had been broken for too long. The first few days after Max came home with Sarah were a blur of new smells, new sounds, and a lot of learning. Max seemed happy to be out of the shelter, but everything was still so strange to him. He wasn't used to being in a home anymore, and his excitement often got the best of him. Sarah had read a lot about German Shepherds before deciding to adopt him. She knew they were smart, energetic, and loyal. But nothing had quite prepared her for how much energy Max had. From the moment they stepped through the door, he was bouncing around, sniffing every corner of the house, wagging his tail furiously. He was curious about everything. Sarah's shoes, the kitchen table, the couch, even the corners of the walls. It was like he wanted to explore every inch of his new space, and it was impossible for Sarah to keep up. She had set up a cozy bed for him in the living room, hoping he would settle down after the long drive. But Max had other ideas. He took one look at the bed, sniffed it, then trotted off to the hallway and started sniffing around there instead. His energy was nonstop, and it was starting to wear Sarah out. The first night was the toughest. Max refused to sleep in the bed Sarah had set up for him. Instead, he paced the house, constantly moving, his nails clicking on the hardwood floors. Sarah tried to call him over to the bed, but he just looked at her with those big brown eyes before turning away and continuing his restless wandering. By the time the morning light came, Sarah was exhausted. Max hadn't let her get a full night's sleep. She sat on the couch, rubbing her tired eyes. Max, on the other hand, was full of life, jumping around and wagging his tail, ready to start another busy day. It was clear to Sarah that this wasn't going to be easy. Max had lived a very different life before, and it was going to take time for him to adjust to his new home. The next day, Sarah took him for a walk around the neighborhood. She hoped the fresh air would help burn off some of his energy. At first, everything seemed fine. Max walked by her side, his leash tight in her hand, but then he saw a squirrel dart across the street. Max was gone in a flash, pulling Sarah along behind him like she was weightless. She stumbled and almost fell, but Max was too focused on the squirrel to notice. When they reached the end of the street, he finally stopped, panting heavily, looking proud of himself. Sarah stood there, out of breath, trying to catch her balance. "Max? No, you have to listen to me," she said, but Max didn't seem to understand. He just sat down, panting and wagging his tail as if nothing had happened. Over the next few days, Sarah tried everything she could think of. She brought him toys to play with, gave him long walks, and even spent time training him to sit and stay. But Max was stubborn. He would listen for a moment, but then he would get distracted by something. A passing car, a bird in the sky, a leaf fluttering in the wind. His attention span seemed to be shorter than she expected, and his energy didn't seem to fade. At night, he still wouldn't settle down. He would jump up on the couch, then down again, pacing around the house like he couldn't find a spot that felt right. Sarah started to feel frustrated. She had wanted to help Max, to give him a better life, but it was hard when he seemed so unpredictable. She loved him, but sometimes she felt like she didn't know how to help him. She began to wonder if maybe she wasn't the right person for him, or if perhaps she had underestimated just how much energy a dog like Max needed. But one evening, when Sarah was sitting on the porch with Max, watching the sunset, something changed. Max, who had been running around all day, suddenly stopped. He walked over to Sarah, sat beside her, and rested his head on her lap. Sarah looked down at him, her heart softening. In that moment, she understood. Max wasn't being difficult on purpose. He was scared, confused, and trying to adjust to a world that was new and overwhelming. Sarah gently petted his head and whispered, "I'm not giving up on you, Max. We'll figure this out together." Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust, and for the first time since he had arrived, he seemed to relax. It was a small step, but it was enough. Sarah knew that this wasn't going to be easy. There would be more rough days ahead. But she was beginning to see that Max wasn't a lost cause. He just needed time, patience, and a person who understood his heart. And Sarah was determined to be that person. As the days passed, Sarah began to realize that Max wasn't a bad dog. He was just a dog who had been misunderstood for too long. His high energy, his constant need for attention, and his restless behavior were signs of a dog who had never learned to slow down or trust the people around him. Max needed structure, training, and most of all, patience, and Sarah was ready to give him all of that. Sarah spent every day with Max, trying new ways to connect with him. She started taking him to a local dog park where he could run off his energy in a safe place. At first, Max was all over the place, chasing after every dog and sniffing every tree. He was like a child in a candy store, filled with excitement and wonder at all the new smells and sights. But slowly, something started to change. After a few weeks, Max began to settle down at the park. Instead of running in every direction, he started focusing on Sarah. He would look up at her for guidance, waiting for her to throw a ball or call his name. When she did, He would chase after it with a joyful bark, bringing it back to her every time. It was the first sign that he was learning how to focus, how to follow commands, and how to bond with her in a way that was healthy for both of them. At home, Sarah worked with Max on basic commands: sit, stay, and come. At first, Max was easily distracted. He would sit for a moment, then get up and run to the window, barking at the birds outside. But Sarah didn't give up. She used treats to reward him when he followed through with a command. And little by little, Max started to get it. He learned to sit still when Sarah asked, to stay in one spot while she went to the kitchen, and to come to her when she called his name. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Every time Max learned something new, Sarah felt a small victory. She could see the changes in him, not just in his behavior, but in his personality. Max was becoming more calm, more confident, and more trusting. He would rest his head on her lap at night, a soft sigh escaping his mouth as he closed his eyes. He had finally learned that he was safe in his new home. But the real transformation came one afternoon when Sarah decided to try something new: agility training. There was a local dog trainer who specialized in high-energy dogs, and after hearing good things about her, Sarah decided to give it a shot. Max was always full of energy, so Sarah thought that agility training might be the perfect way to channel that energy in a productive way. The first session was tough. Max was excited and distracted, trying to jump over the obstacles before Sarah could even guide him. But the trainer, a woman named Rachel, was patient and kind. She worked with Max, showing him how to weave between cones, jump over small hurdles, and crawl under bars. At first, Max was all over the place, but Rachel showed Sarah how to help him stay focused, using positive reinforcement and encouragement. By the end of the first session, Max was exhausted but happy. He had made it through the basic course, jumping over hurdles and running through tunnels. His tail wagged nonstop, and his eyes sparkled with pride. Sarah could hardly believe how much he had improved in such a short time. The transformation wasn't just in his behavior, it was in his confidence too. Max wasn't just the restless, misunderstood dog from the shelter anymore. He was becoming a dog with purpose, a dog who had found something he loved to do. From then on, Sarah and Max went to agility training twice a week. Max's skills grew, and so did his bond with Sarah. He started to listen more attentively, and their walks became more enjoyable. He no longer pulled on a leash or darted off at every squirrel he saw. Instead, he stayed by her side, looking up at her as if to say, "I'm ready. What's next?" One evening, after a particularly successful training session, Sarah sat with Max on the porch, watching the sunset. Max rested his head on her knee, and Sarah gently scratched behind his ears. "You've come a long way, buddy," she said softly. Max looked up at her with those deep brown eyes, and for a moment, it was as if he understood every word. He licked her hand, his way of saying thank you. Sarah smiled, feeling the sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Max had become the dog she always hoped for. He wasn't perfect, but neither was she. Together, they had learned how to work through their challenges. And in doing so, they had found something far more valuable than perfection: an unbreakable bond built on trust, patience, and love. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah knew one thing for sure: she and Max were exactly where they were meant to be. As time went on, Sarah and Max grew closer with each passing day. Max had become a well-behaved, happy dog. He listened to commands, loved his walks, and had mastered agility training. The bond they shared was stronger than either of them had ever expected. But just when things seemed perfect, life threw them a challenge that neither was prepared for. One morning, Sarah woke up to a strange noise coming from outside. It wasn't the usual sounds of birds or the rustling of leaves in the wind. This was different, louder, more urgent. Her heart raced as she got out of bed and walked to the window. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. Across the street, a small house was on fire. Thick smoke was rising into the sky, and flames danced in the windows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her first thought was to call 911, but she was too late. Sirens were already blaring in the distance. The fire trucks were on their way. Max, who had been lying on his bed in the living room, jumped up at the sound of the sirens. His ears were perked, and he paced back and forth nervously. Max was always protective, but today there was something different in his behavior. He was anxious, restless, and he kept looking at Sarah as if trying to tell her something. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to figure out what was happening. "Max, what's wrong?" she murmured, but Max didn't answer. Instead, he stood by the door, looking at it, and then back at her, his tail stiff and his body tense. Sarah quickly grabbed her phone to check the news and saw that the fire had spread to the house next door. The whole block was in danger. The fire trucks were now on the scene, and firefighters were trying to control the flames. But something inside Sarah told her that she couldn't just stand by and watch. "I have to help," Sarah said aloud, mostly to herself. She grabbed Max's leash and attached it to his collar. He was still acting oddly, but she didn't have time to think about it. They had to go. Outside, the air was thick with smoke, and the sounds of crackling fire filled the street. Max pulled on the leash, his instincts kicking in. He was ready to do whatever it took. Sarah had no idea what he was planning, but she trusted him. They walked down the street toward the fire, and as they approached, Max suddenly stopped. He was looking at a house 2 doors down, where the front door was wide open. Max barked once and started pulling again, this time more urgently. It took Sarah a moment to understand what he was trying to tell her. Someone might still be inside. Without hesitation, Sarah followed Max toward the house. The closer they got, the more intense the heat became, and the air grew heavy with smoke. But Max was determined. He tugged at the leash, leading Sarah up the steps and toward the door. When they reached the entrance, Max barked again, louder this time, and Sarah finally understood. He wanted her to go inside. Sarah hesitated. It was dangerous, and the fire was getting worse. But she couldn't ignore Max's urgency. She looked at him, her heart racing. "Are you sure, Max?" she whispered. But Max was already inside, his nose sniffing the air as he moved forward into the dark, smoky interior of the house. "Max," Sarah called, but she knew he wouldn't stop. He was doing what he was trained to do. He was protecting her, just like he had been trained to do as a loyal companion. She followed him into the house. The smoke was thick, and the heat was unbearable. Sarah could barely see in front of her, but she trusted Max's sense of direction. He led her down the hallway, his tail swaying gently as he moved ahead. Suddenly, Max stopped in front of a closed door and began pawing at it. It was the kitchen. Sarah reached out and turned the knob, the door creaking open. Inside, she saw a woman who appeared to be in shock, standing frozen by the stove. The fire had already begun to spread through the room, but she hadn't moved. "Come on," Sarah shouted, grabbing the woman's arm and pulling her toward the door. Max barked once, urging them to move faster, then turned to look back at the woman, making sure she was following. Together, with Max leading the way, they made it outside just in time. The woman was safe, and the fire trucks arrived moments later. Sarah stood on the front lawn, panting, looking down at Max, who was standing proudly by her side. He had saved a life, just like he had always been meant to do. The bond between them was stronger than ever, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. As the fire department took control of the situation, Sarah knelt down and hugged Max tightly. "You did it, buddy. You saved her. You saved us." Max wagged his tail, his eyes shining with pride. He may have been abandoned once, but now he had found his true purpose: to be Sarah's protector, her partner, and her family. Together, they had faced a challenge neither of them could have predicted, but together, they had made it through. The days after the fire felt like a blur for Sarah. The shock of what had happened, combined with the overwhelming relief that she and the woman had made it out safely, left her exhausted. But even through the haze, one thing was clear: Max had saved a life. Max had proven that he wasn't just a dog. He was a hero. The fire department had praised Sarah for her bravery, but she knew the truth. It wasn't her bravery that made the difference. It was Max's. He had been the one to sense danger before anyone else, the one who led them to the house, and the one who stayed calm in the midst of chaos. Max had acted on instinct, and his loyalty to her had saved a life. That night, Sarah sat on the couch, staring at Max as he lay beside her. His head rested on her lap, and for a moment, everything was peaceful again. The world outside had returned to normal, and the fire, though devastating, was no longer a threat. But the event had reminded her of how much Max meant to her. In that moment, Sarah knew that she couldn't imagine her life without him. The following days were filled with calls from the police and the fire department, trying to gather details about the rescue. They wanted to know everything that had happened, but Sarah wasn't sure what to say. Max had simply followed his instincts, and he hadn't hesitated when it came to protecting her and the woman in danger. It wasn't a story of daring heroism. It was a story of a dog doing what he was meant to do. But even though they had settled back into their normal routine, something had changed between them. There was a deeper level of trust, a stronger bond that went beyond the usual companionship. Max had proven that he would always be there for Sarah, no matter what. Weeks passed, and life began to settle down. Max's behavior remained calm and focused, and he continued to excel in his agility training. Sarah was proud of him, but she knew that the real reward wasn't in his skills. It was in the love they shared and the way they had each become stronger for having each other in their lives. One afternoon, as Sarah was walking Max in the park, something unexpected happened. They had just finished their usual walk and were resting under a large oak tree when a man approached them. He was older, his face lined with age, but his eyes were warm as he smiled at Max. "Is this your dog?" the man asked gently. Sarah nodded. "Yes, this is Max." The man crouched down to Max's level and offered him a treat, which Max eagerly accepted. "I couldn't help but notice how well-behaved he is. I've never seen a dog quite like him. He's special." Sarah smiled. "He really is. He's been through a lot, but he's the best dog I could ever ask for." The man paused, looking at Max with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "I had a dog like him once, a German Shepherd, loyal, brave, and always by my side. But I lost him a few years ago. He was my best friend." Sarah's heart went out to him. "I'm sorry. Losing a dog is never easy." The man nodded. "It's been tough, but I've learned to keep going. I can see it in the way Max looks at you. He's more than just a pet. He's a companion, a friend." They talked for a few more minutes, and Sarah learned that the man had recently lost his dog to old age. He seemed content, but there was a hint of longing in his voice. Max, ever the gentle giant, sat quietly by Sarah's side, his head turned toward the man, sensing his sadness. As the man said his goodbyes and walked away, Sarah couldn't help but feel grateful for everything Max had given her. He had filled a space in her heart that she hadn't known was empty. He had healed the pain of losing her previous dog, Daisy, and had shown her the true meaning of companionship. That night, as Max curled up beside her on the couch, Sarah realized that the bond they shared was unbreakable. Max had been through so much before coming into her life, and yet he had come out stronger, more loyal, and more loving than ever. She knew that no matter what life threw their way, they would face it together. Max had taught her something important. Love and loyalty aren't just words. They are actions. They are the little things. The way Max always stayed close to her, the way he looked after her, and the way he kept her safe when she needed him most. Sarah leaned down and kissed Max on the top of his head. "Thank you, buddy. You're my hero," she whispered. Max's tail wagged gently in response, and in that moment, Sarah knew that they had both found exactly what they had been searching for: each other. It had been a few months since the fire, and life for Sarah and Max seemed to have returned to a peaceful routine. Max had become more than just a dog. He was a constant companion, a loyal protector, and most importantly, a friend. Their days were filled with walks, training sessions, and cozy evenings on the couch. Sarah couldn't imagine her life without him by her side. One morning, as Sarah was sipping her coffee and watching Max play in the yard, she received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it was the last thing Sarah expected to hear. "Hello, is this Sarah Johnson?" "Yes, this is Sarah." "Who's calling?" "This is Officer Blake from the animal shelter. I'm calling about Max." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What about Max? Is something wrong?" No, everything is fine. We just wanted to let you know that we've been doing some routine checks on past animals we found, and we came across something strange. We've been looking through the records of animals that were abandoned or given up, and we found something about Max's past, something that might be important." Sarah sat up straight, her mind racing. "What do you mean? What do you know about Max's past?" There was a pause on the other end before Officer Blake continued. "It seems that Max wasn't just abandoned once. He was part of a special program that trains dogs for search and rescue missions. He was taken in by a family who wanted to adopt him, but something happened that caused him to be abandoned. We don't have all the details, but there's more to his story than we initially knew, and it might explain some of his behavior." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Max had always been special, but now she was hearing that there was even more to him than she could have imagined. He had been trained for something big, something important, and it was clear that he was born for a life of service, not just as a pet. "Is he okay?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Max is doing great now, Sarah. We just thought you should know more about his history. It might give you some insight into his instincts and why he behaves the way he does." After a long conversation with Officer Blake, Sarah learned that Max had been a part of an elite search and rescue program before he was abandoned. The family that had taken him in had been trained to use him for disaster response, but something had gone wrong. Max had been abandoned shortly after being sent to a new home, and the shelter had never been able to find out why. They had assumed he was just another unwanted dog, but now it seemed there was much more to his story. Sarah hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of shock and awe. She looked out the window at Max, who was now resting quietly in the yard. He was just a dog to most people, but to Sarah, he was a hero. It made so much sense now. His incredible energy, his loyalty, and his desire to protect. Max had been trained for something bigger than they had both known. A few days later, Sarah received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from the same search and rescue program that Max had been a part of. The letter explained that they had been looking for Max for months after he was abandoned and had been trying to track him down. They wanted to know if he was available for a special mission, one that required a dog with the specific skills Max had. The mission was a search and rescue operation for a missing hiker in the nearby mountains. The rescue team had been unable to locate the hiker despite extensive efforts, but Max's unique skills could make all the difference. The program wanted to know if Sarah would allow Max to participate in the search. Sarah was stunned. She had no idea what to do. Max had lived a peaceful life with her for the past few months, and the idea of him going back into a potentially dangerous situation made her heart ache. But at the same time, she knew this was Max's calling. This was what he was born to do. After talking it over with Max, as if he understood every word, Sarah decided to take the leap. She agreed to let Max participate in the mission, knowing that it was the right thing for him. A few days later, Sarah and Max met the search and rescue team at the base of the mountains. Max immediately recognized the scent of the trail and seemed to be filled with purpose. He was ready to do what he was trained for. The team set off through the rugged terrain, with Max leading the way. His confidence was evident. He was in his element. Sarah followed closely behind, her heart pounding with every step. She knew Max was strong and capable, but she couldn't shake the worry that gripped her. She was proud of him, but she also feared the dangers they might face. The hours passed, and the team made their way deeper into the mountains. Max worked tirelessly, following the scent trails with precision. Finally, after hours of searching, he stopped in his tracks. The search and rescue mission had changed everything for Max and Sarah. It was as if the world had shifted, revealing just how much Max was capable of. Not only had he saved a life, but he had also shown Sarah just how extraordinary he truly was. As they walked back down the mountain together, with the sun setting behind them, Max looked up at Sarah with eyes full of quiet pride. He was happy. He had found his purpose, and Sarah had helped him do it. Back home, life slowly returned to normal. The excitement of the rescue mission faded, but the bond between Sarah and Max only grew stronger. Max's role in the search and rescue program was not over. He would continue to work with the team, helping with missions when they arose, but now he had a new sense of peace. Sarah had proven to him that he wasn't just a tool or a working dog. He was part of a family, loved and appreciated for who he was. Max still had his training sessions and daily walks, but now there was a special calmness in his demeanor. He no longer seemed restless or anxious, as he had when Sarah first adopted him. His energy, once overwhelming, now had purpose and direction. And when he wasn't working, he was content to lie by Sarah's side, enjoying the quiet moments of their life together. One afternoon, Sarah received a call from the search and rescue program. They had another mission lined up. It wasn't urgent. There was no missing person or emergency this time, but they needed Max's skills for a training exercise. The team wanted to test their abilities in more challenging terrain, and they knew Max would be the perfect candidate. Sarah hesitated for a moment. She had grown so attached to Max and had become protective of him after their last adventure. The thought of sending him out on another mission, even for training, made her nervous. But then she looked at him, lying on the floor beside her, and she realized how far he had come. He was more than capable of handling whatever came next, and more than anything, she knew this was what Max was meant to do. "Are you ready for another adventure, buddy?" Sarah asked, looking at Max with a smile. Max lifted his head and wagged his tail, his eyes gleaming with excitement. It was as if he understood exactly what she was asking. This was his life, working, helping others, and making a difference. He was born for it. The next morning, Sarah and Max set off to meet the search and rescue team. The air was crisp and cool as they drove to the training site, located in a remote area surrounded by forests and mountains. Max seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. He sat upright in the car, his ears perked, ready for whatever challenge awaited him. The training was intense, involving long hikes, obstacle courses, and a series of simulated rescue operations. Max moved through each challenge with ease, his focus unwavering. Sarah watched from a distance, amazed at how much he had improved since the first time they had set out on a mission together. He was confident, sure of himself, and completely in control. But as the day went on, Sarah noticed something different in Max. During one of the exercises, when they were testing Max's ability to find hidden people in a wooded area, Max stopped. He sniffed the air, his tail stiffening, and then he turned towards Sarah, who was standing nearby. Something was wrong. Sarah quickly made her way over to Max, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached him just as he barked sharply and ran in the direction of a small nearby clearing. Without hesitation, Sarah followed, her instincts kicking in. When they reached the clearing, Sarah froze. Lying on the ground was a young man, unconscious but alive. He had apparently been injured and had wandered off during the training exercise, somehow getting separated from the group. Max had sensed it before anyone else. His sharp senses had found the person who needed help, and he had led Sarah straight to him. Sarah knelt beside the man, checking for signs of injury. He was breathing, but he needed help. Max stayed close, his nose gently nudging the man's hand, making sure he was still alive. The search and rescue team arrived moments later, their eyes widening in surprise as they saw Max's find. They quickly called for medical help, and within minutes, the man was safely taken away to receive treatment. It was another successful rescue, all thanks to Max's quick thinking and incredible instincts. As Sarah watched the team congratulate Max, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Max had proven, once again, that he was more than just a dog. He was a lifesaver, a hero, and a companion. He had a gift, one that he used not for fame or recognition, but simply to help others. And in that, he had shown Sarah the true meaning of selflessness and loyalty. That evening, as they drove home, Sarah glanced at Max, who was resting his head on her lap, tired but content. She reached down and gently scratched behind his ears.